Me. Sorry.
I welcome you all to the Institute of Politics. Very pleased to have our guest from the Senate. Just a word, please, about our guest, a man who in a very short time, indeed, made a difference in the United States Senate. I saw him when he came on into town, rode in from Wisconsin on his horse. No, or where were we? No. But no, a very steady, thoughtful, direct, persistent man, candid. If he said he was going to do something, he did it. I watched him. I worked on some things with him. Particularly watched him in the campaign finance reform, and he'll discuss these things. And Bill Bradley and I became the national co-chairman of Project Independence, which was about and is about campaign finance reform. Ann and I have come to know Russ, to enjoy him. He is and this is a term of high honor in Wyoming, a scrapper, a real scrapper, a man you would want on your side. And he and Mary are very nice friends. To introduce him this evening is Michael Sandell, and we know who he is and what he does, but amid all of the credentials, and they are awesome, in his teaching and his research and his contemporary political philosophy and writings and the history of political thought and all the things he does, he is also the chairman of the panel on fellows in the Institute of Politics. And he has given so much to this school and to the Kennedy School and to the Institute of Politics. He is always there for us. And I don't know how he does it because of the activities of his life and his personal endeavors, but he's always there for us, and that would define him beautifully. And Michael, if you would tell us about your friend of 25 years duration. I'll leave all the anecdotal material to you. It's some good ones, though. I mean, come on, Michael.
Well, thanks, Al, very much for that introduction, and thank you for all that you've done to bring Wyoming wit and warmth and decency to Harvard and to the Institute of Politics. You really made a huge difference here. And thank you, too, for giving me this opportunity to introduce my friend, Russ Feingold. We were together in graduate school. We were sent off to England as Rhodes Scholars. We were both sort of out of place, out of our country. We were ill at ease in the face of British proprieties. We rode over, those were the days when they sent people over on the Queen Elizabeth II, and so we were sort of, well, I had come originally from Minnesota and Russ from Wisconsin, so we were two Midwest boys sort of gazing and gaping at the surroundings and finding ourselves always, not always, once in a while, not doing exactly what the British expected of us. And the term scrapper that Al used is actually is a pretty good term, and that struck me about Russ Feingold even before he became engaged in politics. We hadn't gone to Ivy League school, so when we found ourselves in England and they all played squash, we thought we would try it out and ricocheted the ball off each other's head more than off the ball in front. But he was very much a scrapper then. And we've seen how a one-time scrapper has become really a pillar of courage and character in the United States Senate. Most of you probably know the story about Senator Feingold's efforts on behalf of campaign finance reform and how that it almost did him in, that commitment, because in his recent race in Wisconsin, he accepted self-imposed limits on the source and amount of campaign contributions as a matter of principle. And he was running behind really up to the last days of the election as a result of that. And when the National Party tried to pour in funds to rescue him, he insisted that they take that money, that out-of-state money, out of the race. He wanted to speak for himself, and with the resources he had raised, according to principles that he would like to see embodied in campaign finance reform. It's not an easy or a popular battle, especially when you depend for your livelihood, for your profession, for your political survival on the huge amounts of money. George Washington Plunkett, who was the great Tammany Hall boss who despised reformers, he wouldn't have cared for Senator Feingold. He agreed with him, though, on one thing. He said, there's always a problem with money in politics. There's never enough to go around. But the problem of money in politics, too much money in politics, is not, despite what Senator Feingold might tell you, not the biggest problem in American politics. It may be the second biggest. The first biggest problem is not too much money, but too little courage. And Senator Russ Feingold is someone who has addressed, by his example of courage and conviction, the first problem as well as the second problem that confronts American democracy. So it's with great pleasure and pride that I welcome to Harvard Senator Russ Feingold from Wisconsin.
Well, thank you, Michael. That was a wonderful thing to hear from you. I remember our long talks, our travel together, and your kindness and not mentioning who won those squash games, because I don't think I ever did. But we were great friends there and have stayed in touch all these years, and I hear frequently from Harvard students who their favorite professor was, and it has frequently been Michael Sandel. I just want you to know I feel that I also was one of your students because of our time together at Oxford, and I greatly appreciate those words from such a great teacher and a good friend. Alan Simpson, I had so much fun working with this man. A real sense of humor in the U.S. Senate. It's rare. and it is missed because there is not enough lightness there. There's not enough of disarming each other so that we can really talk about things, and he was wonderful at it. And we had great fun. Sometimes he'd skewer me a little bit, but it was good for me.
How about when you got me?
Well, that was even more fun. But I also want to acknowledge the fact that Senator Simpson, not only since being in the Senate, but when he was in the Senate, took the courageous step as a member of the majority party of co-sponsoring and working hard for our Mccain-Feingold legislation, which was a very valuable thing. And I can't help but mention another friend, Senator David Pryor, who also served in the Senate in a brief time that we were there together as well. Wonderful, decent man, great senator, and it is such a thrill to be with both of you again. It's one of the hard things about being in the Senate. You make these friends and then they go and retire on you just after you get there. And the place is a much lesser place without these two senators. I want to thank the Kennedy School. This is a great honor for me to be here 20 years after I graduated from law school at this place. And I don't even want to make these comments without acknowledging John F. Kennedy. He is the reason I am here today. It is his inspiration when I was even a very young child, and the inspiration of the family and the politics that came out of this area through the Kennedy family that has an awful lot to do with the fact that I am in this business, that I continue to take the risks that involved, and I do want to acknowledge Senator Ted Kennedy, who to me is one of the great senators of the 20th century. It is a tremendous honor to work with him. The junior senator from Massachusetts, John Kerry, is a real leader on campaign finance reform as well. And of course, the House bill that actually passed the House has the name of Representative Marty Meehan of Massachusetts as well. So this is an important place for campaign finance reform. And in addition to this wonderful opportunity to talk to you, I had the opportunity today to spend a little time promoting the importance of the Massachusetts Clean Money Initiative, which truly is a critical step forward. If the job can be finished, if the funds can be appropriated so it can actually be implemented, this can be the real modern example of the way things should be at the federal level as well. And I want to thank all of you in the state of Massachusetts for taking that tremendous step. Now, I have always been interested in campaign finance reform for the whole 16, 17 years that I've been in government. But I've become sort of intensely involved with it in the last few years. Since John McCain approached me, I was a very young senator. I'd just gone from being a majority senator to a minority senator in the 1994 election. And yet John McCain approached me and asked me if I wanted to work on some reform issues, and I became deeply involved. And I'm glad I have. And maybe it's a little inflammatory to entitle a lecture, Legalized Bribery, Campaign Financing at the Turn of the Century. I wouldn't have said that in 1982 when I first ran for the state Senate. I wouldn't have said that in 1995 when we first introduced the McCain-Feingold bill. It is a bit extreme, but I have few doubts that it's right. My feelings about this have been an evolution for me, and it is my hope that I can soon, or at least ultimately, get back to the original concerns that got me involved in campaign financing. But those are not the most immediate concerns. Let me try and trace briefly how I got from what might be called a Wisconsin-style idealism about fair elections in 1982 to a very troubled view of our national political process to the point where I'd refer to it as legalized bribery. There's really three steps that I've gone through. The first is a concern about who gets to run for office. And then secondly, a concern about what happens to you once you're elected, what it's like to be an incumbent. And then the one I've come to, not exclusively because I'm determined to get at the other two, but the one that has really sort of overtaken us, is the connection of money to the purchasing of public policy. Now, the first matter was obvious to me. I first ran for office in 1982, long shot race for the Wisconsin State Senate. I was 29, the incumbent was 83, and it was a very civil race. To me, it was not that long ago, but it was another era, another century in effect, in terms of campaign financing. That was the year that one of my predecessors, Senator William Proxmire of Wisconsin, only spent $150 to get reelected, and he used the money for postage to return campaign contributions. It's a little different time. In my race that year, I spent a whopping $35,000 to get elected to the state Senate, of which I only had to raise $17,000 in small contributions. The other $17,000, when the Wisconsin law was working the way it should, was a public grant. Now we have $1 million state Senate races in Wisconsin. I only won that race by 31 votes out of 47,000. So I didn't think this one was close at all. The U.S. Senate won after that. But the fact is that no one said to me in 1982, as I was knocking on 15,000 doors and trying to make the case, no one said, where are you going to get the money? People said to me, no one knows you. That was a fair remark. But nobody said to me, where are you going to get the money? And I still favor, as I did then and as I do now, a public financing approach to elections, both nationally and in the states, and that is my ultimate goal. But as I entered the state legislature and I started to hone my skills and think of a career in higher office in politics, I began to observe a switch in all of this. I began to see how people got elected, especially to higher office. It wasn't the old pecking order where political leaders of a party would determine who gets to run, and that was good news for me. But the bad news is that it pretty much become two different types of players. One, either somebody who was an incumbent at a lower level, who had access to lots of PAC money or politically special interest money, or somebody who was independently wealthy. And so when I set out to run against Senator Robert Castron for the U.S. Senate, not only was I confronted with a senator who was prepared and did spend about $7 million to be reelected, but just to win the primary to try to run against him, I faced a man who spent $4.5 million of his own money on the primary and a congressional incumbent who spent $2.5 million. And there I got the question. Every day, no matter what I wanted to talk about, why are you running? You can't run. Where are you going to get the money, Russ? And it made me irritated. It made me really want to win. It made me a little irrational about continuing the race, because in some ways it didn't make sense. It appeared to me that people of average means had been excluded from the process. And I know I won, but we had some unusual things. I mean, Elvis Presley endorsed me. This was not expected. But obviously, you'll have to see my ads from that era to understand how he could have done that, but he did, and it was very timely. But obviously, most rational people would not take the step I took, and I wouldn't recommend it to a very talented teacher or a very talented small business person or an excellent member of the Milwaukee City Council. It would be hard for me in this climate to say, go ahead and just run for the U.S. Senate. And so as I entered the U.S. Senate, with a great deal of luck and other things happening, it was actually those two primary opponents spending an enormous amount of money to make each other look bad to let me go through in the primary. I entered the Senate especially interested in making sure that through campaign finance reform we broaden the opportunity for more people to run for office instead of constricting it, so that I could tell high school students, I could look them in the eye and I could say, someday you can run for higher office, for a congressional office, and money will not prevent you. I told them, and I want to tell them today, although it's hard, that that is a small part of the American dream. So that was the first concern, making sure people, anyone, or at least a lot more people, could have the chance to run for office. The second concern really hit me when I got to the Senate. I was thrilled to be there, and I'm in that sort of early part of the 6-year mode right now, Ellen. Feels real good when you're in those first couple months of a 6-year term. But gradually things start dawning on you if you want to run again. The power of incumbency is not what it once was, I can tell you, because of the pressure of fundraising. There's sort of an increasing anxiety that goes on about fundraising. There's the notion your supporters say, make sure you build up a good treasury early on so you can scare off opponents. Or what's going to happen if somebody has $10 million and runs against you? And the result is an already very busy job becomes a very messy situation in terms of your schedule. The pressure to go to fundraisers, not just in your own state, but all over the country. The pressure to do call time when you're in Washington. Helping out other members who are running even when you're not in your cycle because you want them to help you. Trying to fit that in to an already almost insane schedule. I wish I could encapsulate things the way Senator Robert Byrd does, but I'm out there on the floor for 3 years talking about this, and he comes down in 15 minutes and just says what I was trying to say. He said, senators have fractured attention. And that's what it is. It's so hard to focus when you're being pulled in so many directions, and in fact, the pull of this campaign financing is one of the worst influences on destroying your ability to focus on what is important and talk to your colleagues. Now, I believe that the best way to get a co-sponsor of a campaign finance bill is to go out to what we then called National Airport, now Reagan National Airport, at about 11 o'clock at night. Watch senators coming in on a Monday night after they've done fundraisers all night and say, would you co-sponsor my bill? I actually got one that way. I won't tell you who. But he was so miserable that he finally went over the top and said, I don't want to live like this, and this isn't why I fought so hard to come to the U.S. Senate. And yes, many of the resignations, what I call the brain drain in the United States Senate, which these two individuals represent, they'll tell you a lot of different reasons when they say they're quitting. When you talk to them privately, they'll tell you it was their grandchildren. I'm sure that's legitimate. They'll tell you they want to move on and do other things, but privately, almost every single one of them will tell you they didn't want to go through this money chase anymore. As great a place as the U.S. Senate, it wasn't worth it to them anymore. And of course, this is why John McCain and I tried to construct a bill, and I think we have constructed a bill that tries to address that issue. It addresses the issue of access to the ballot, and it also addresses the issue of fractured attention, because what we wanted to do originally was to voluntarily have people limit their spending, to get most of their contributions from their own home state, and in return to get free or reduced costs for their television time. So people who hadn't run could have a fair chance to run, and people that were already in office would not have to spend all their time raising money if they were willing to agree to a limit. And all of these things must be addressed, but as I've said, even this concern has been overtaken by a new and recent force, and that is the proliferation of virtually unregulated campaign contributions. And this leads to my main point. It is a relatively recent development. It is a result of a 1978 FEC ruling in effect about soft money, but the impact of it wasn't felt until just recently. When John McCain and I introduced this bill in 1995, we didn't really know what soft money was. We had a small provision in the bill that sort of saw this coming, but we had no clue that it would completely overtake the political process just in the last 4 years. We saw it in all its horrible glory in the debacle of the 1996 elections. And of course, the senators in the cloakrooms told me about the old days. Money and politics are always going to be connected. Apparently, $100 bills used to be handed out, maybe even briefcases. I mean, there was a need for rules. There was a need for reform. But this disaster that has occurred in our campaign finance reform laws is not just about the decline of the 1974, 1976 reforms after Watergate. It has been illegal since very early, the early 1900s, the early part of this century, for corporations to give these kind of contributions directly. It's never been allowed. It's been illegal for labor unions to do this since the 1940s. This is a brave new world of campaign financing that we have never seen the likes of before. And as Senator Fred Thompson, the chairman of the Government Affairs Committee, says, we just really don't have any campaign finance laws anymore. It is not a difference of degree. Yes, under the current law as it is supposed to be worked, a person can give $1,000, and when you say $1,000, you're really saying $4,000 per couple. Yes, a political action committee can give a senator $10,000 over 6 years, and that's real money in Wisconsin. But it pales in comparison to the ability to write $100,000, $250,000, $500,000, or $1 million soft money check. This is different. And I find this awfully ironic when I'm working so hard in the foreign relations committees with other senators to get other countries to follow our lead and to do something like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which prohibits bribery in our country. We're so proud that we have this law. It's a good law. Bill Proxmire wrote it. We want to get other countries to sign the treaty so they don't have bribery in their government. And yet we have this mess. So let me quickly illustrate just 4 very short examples of what you could refer to as legalized bribery. I emphasize the legal, but the public does not know how different things are from before. This is the toughest thing to talk about because we all get campaign contributions. And because I believe almost every member sincerely does not want to be influenced by these large checks indirectly any more than they want to be influenced directly. But the reality is that, as my friend and colleague Bill Bradley said when we were in Boston a couple of years ago, if we can't make this connection in the public's mind between these big dollars and the impact on their personal lives, it is going to be very difficult to finally get the reform, even the modest reform that we want, let alone the courageous reform that is being attempted in many states. We must show the people of this country how the people's business isn't being done and their wishes are being frustrated by this corruption. Example number one, the effort to pass legislation now on bankruptcy reform. We need bankruptcy reform. It's been 20 years. The code is outdated. There are people that abuse it. And there are legitimate concerns about that. But when you have a bill that almost every bankruptcy judge, almost every bankruptcy trustee, almost all debtor attorneys and many, many creditors' attorneys, as well as most academics say is an unbalanced bill, it's kind of strange that the bill just keeps rolling through. 75 House co-sponsors of the bill averaged $35,000 in creditor PAC money. But that's small change compared to what's happened since 1995. Soft money and PAC money combined from consumer credit has been in the amount of $15 million just on this bill, on this issue. $15 million for the Republicans and $7 million for the Democrats. And the MBNA Corporation gave $200,000 to the National Republican Senate Committee on October 9th, 1998, on the day after the bill went through the conference committee. There's not a lot of subtlety in Washington on these things. A second example, slowing down legislation. One of the biggest issues that's going through Congress now is electricity deregulation. It's a huge issue. The Washington Post says that the lobbying battle, it might be the lobbying battle of the decade. It has implications for consumers and the environment and many, many issues. It's a combination of the energy power companies and the industrial power users together. In the last couple of years gave a total of $19 million of soft and PAC money. And I say it's an example of slowing legislation, which is to more put the blame on the members of Congress. There's this perverse incentive, well, if you pass the bill this session, well, then you can't get all the money next session. So kind of stretch it out a little bit. And there's a lot more dough to be gained out of this whole thing. Just one example, Enron, a $15 billion Houston-based energy company, gave $1 million to the Republicans and Democrats alone, and almost $700,000 of it was soft money. So it can be used to slow legislation. Third, it can be used to sort of stop us from fixing a mistake. And this is one, it's obviously just my view, but I think the Telecom Act, Telecommunications Act of 1996 was a mistake. My friend John McCain says everybody was represented at the table but the consumers. And that's exactly what's happened. Since it's passed, we were supposed to have telephone companies getting into cable and cable companies getting into telephones, and everything was going to sort of come down in the spirit of competition. Payphone rates have gone up 40%. Cable rates have gone up 8.5%. And now, as consumer dissatisfaction is rising, and we're hearing their voice, and as others are trying to provide competition, such as local phone companies or the internet, the effort has been very intense to pour money to stop it. 1997-98, $3.6 million to the Democrats and $5.5 million to the Republicans, and that is 3 times more than these interests gave between 1993 and 1994. Finally, one that is not about legislative matters but is quite odd is an example of trying to influence, in my view, administrative or executive action. And here we're talking about one of the great trade wars in history, the Banana War, that's going on now. Carl Lindner, the CEO of Chiquita Banana, is a major donor to both parties, and somehow we got in a huge fight with the European Union, even if it affects virtually no United States jobs. This would not have been the one that most people would have selected for the United States Trade Representative to go forward on. 100% tariffs on $500 million worth of European imports. Mr. Lindner was ranked as number 4 of 400 top 1998 donors, and just to make sure this has been balanced, I think, but I'm going to make sure it's balanced here, $2 million since 1990, including $500,000 to the state Democratic parties. lot of money for the Democrats on this one. This is a troubling pattern, and I don't think it is correct to say that it has always been so. Of course, each of these policy decisions can be explained on a legitimate policy basis, and perhaps this is just business as usual at the turn of the century. But it takes me back to the last turn of the century, when Wisconsin was gifted with a great politician and governor and senator, Robert M. La Follette, Fighting Bob we call him. His whole political movement was based on the notion that the very few with the resources should not control the political process. The two interests that he had to overcome with his movement were the timbermen and the railroad men. They dominated the state. I am afraid that as we turn this century, that the system of political financing in this country resembles that very much, with just more players. I'll never forget the first time I heard from a group of my fellow Democrats that I needed to get on the phone and call a Wisconsin business and ask them for $20,000. I looked at somebody at the table and I said, "You can't do that." They said, "Yeah, you can." I said, "Well, you're limited to $10,000 for a pack." They said, "No, yes, you can." And then just a couple of years later, one of my colleagues said to me, "Russ, I just called somebody up and asked them for $200,000 so that I could benefit my campaign through the parties." And he said, "I feel like I need a shower." And I said, I was amazed. So 10 times more than the 20,000. And all I knew at that moment was that I never wanted to be on either side of that phone call. There's one side of that phone call. Some of the top CEOs in the country just came to see me, and others, the Committee for Economic Development. And they talked to me about how they feel about getting these calls where the money is unlimited. I like to call the wealthiest people in our society now who do this the fall guys of American politics. It's a form of extortion when you can be asked for that kind of money. But that's one side of the conversation. I, of course, didn't want to be the guy making the call. And that's what led to my decision in 1998. I didn't want to be a senator anymore. If I had to call anybody up at any time and ask them for $100,000 or $200,000, I just didn't want to do it anymore. It just was over the line for me. That doesn't mean anyone who ever did it was wrong. It was just what I needed to do. So my point, whether winning or losing, is I just wanted to let the people of the state and the country know that there had, in fact, been a sea change in campaign financing, that it went against the whole history of the 20th century, that it undid the post-Watergate reforms, that it was, in fact, something like legalized bribery, and that it is making a mockery of the principle of one person, one vote. So I regret that the debate has to be about this. I prefer to have the debate about restoring young people's desire to serve in public office or to help people serve in public office. I want to get back to that, and I will get back to that. We all will. But before we do, we have to stop this out-of-control system that is essentially irrelevant to the lives of most Americans. Thank you very much for having me.
Just the way he did it in the Senate, just exactly. That's why they'd streak out of there. Come in and say, what's Feingold up to today? He's talking about campaign finance reform, and they'd go, shh. But Pryor and I stayed. We never left. Let me say now, we're going to go to questions, and if you would give your name and year and come forward, and questions are always acceptable. It's the long debates that do crumble into, well, enough of that. I wouldn't bring it up again. So, Eric, you're up here to ask a question, aren't you?
I am indeed.
All right, and we'll start around. Is there any mics up there? Are there any mics up there today? Yes, there is one. So we'll get to them. Thanks, Eric. And then over here.
Eric Shapsis, MPP2 at the Kennedy School. Senator, you talked a lot about, obviously, campaign finance reform and also kind of the desire to get people to serve. One of the things that I didn't hear any talk about is the ability for people to self-finance, and that campaign finance reform is great. I've worked on a campaign in fundraising, and I know how much one has to raise in a congressional campaign in California. I mean, it's amazing. But what happens for those people who are looking forward to running for office, but know that there are so many other people out there who can finance themselves at, I mean, in California, take Al Checky, who can drop 50 million.
Well, that's a very serious problem. In fact, I would say that's one of the 2 or 3 things that really motivated me on this issue after my own experience. I'm no fan of people trying to buy elections, and specifically the Mccain-Feingold bill was going to have as one of its incentives that you had to limit your personal spending to, there were different proposals, 50,000, 100,000, 250,000 of your own funding in order to get the benefits. So one of these wealthy candidates would be in the position of having to either limit that and get the free or reduced television time, or alternatively, they would be giving the opponent, the challenger, a significant gift to make them a challenger. And of course, Mr. Checky did not win. Mr. Huffington did not win. You don't need as much as the other person. You need enough to get your message out. But that still raises a very serious issue. So I'm not concerned necessarily about exact equality in these races. And I've been outspent virtually every time I've ever run. But of course, you do need enough to get your message out. And that's why I think it's legitimate under Buckley v. Vallejo to offer an incentive to somebody to not spend too much of their own money. And still in the McCain-Feingold bill, we do have a provision that says you must limit your personal wealth spending to less than $50,000 if you want to get the benefit of the hard money that the party is permitted to give to you up to a certain limit. But I do regard that as crucial and very discouraging to many people when they go up against that kind of money. Sometimes it does backfire on them, though.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brian Smith, and I'm a freshman at the college. And I was wondering, sir, what current steps are you taking to bring this issue back into the national spotlight? And do you think that the 2000 presidential election campaign will make it an issue and help bring a catalyst for change?
Well, I came to the Kennedy School to highlight this as a national issue, and
right.
I'm not kidding around. This is an issue that is ripe for the public to coalesce on. And I think it has to be a combination of what we do in the Congress and what's going on around the country. The fact that you have a place like this, along with the Massachusetts initiative, is exactly the way to finally get frankly, just a few more votes that we need in the Senate to break the filibuster. You may not have noticed it because there was something else going on, but we introduced the McCain-Feingold bill on the first day we could, January 19th. I can't figure out why there wasn't any coverage of that. We did it quietly, but we met with Representative Meehan, Representative Shays, Senator McCain and I met on the last day before this 2-week recess and resolved that we would really pick up the pace now after we'd gone through the impeachment, after we'd gone through getting a few other things through. We didn't want to act as if there was nothing else of concern to the nation. There is, of course. But now we think it's very legitimate to move forward, and it is our general view that it would probably work best if the House went first, if they got the bill up, either voluntarily or through a discharge petition, and get it through again. We think that will provide the momentum and the pressure that will make it more difficult for the remaining senators who are opposing us to vote against us. So we want some action this year, earlier this year rather than later, but the bills have been introduced, and we are more than ready to go. And how will it affect the year 2000 elections? Well, this is, again, so disappointing that if we can't get this done sometime this year to affect the year 2000 elections, they could make the 1996 elections look like nothing. It's already starting. And I think if we have to go through it, so be it. But I am very hopeful that candidates for the presidency will try to avoid what happened in 1996, where both presidential campaigns, in effect, said, yes, we want the public financing, but that they turned around and used soft money to essentially make a farce of what has traditionally been our ability to say, hey, public financing works in the presidential elections, why not have it in Congress? So the presidential election will be important in this regard, as well as the congressional races.
My name is James Williamson. I commend you for your efforts. I'd like to start by suggesting that we stop calling the money that you're talking about soft money, because I really think it masks disguises just how insidious and effective it really is. Also, with all due respect and in the light of Mr. Simpson's remark, I don't buy that your colleagues are as upset about this as you said in your talk, or wouldn't they do something about it? And pending doing something along the lines that you are working so diligently toward, what's preventing them? In 1992, I worked on Jerry Brown's campaign, who made the bedrock of his campaign this principle by saying he wasn't going to take more than $100. And we beat Clinton in the Democratic primary in Connecticut. Now, we went down to defeat in New York for a whole variety of reasons, and some people might not, have questions about Jerry Brown in one way or another, as they do about Clinton. But the principle was there, and it worked, and it drew incredible enthusiasm and energy to his campaign. What's preventing more people running for office from doing something similar, and even further, people like yourself organizing perhaps a consortium of people running for office who will sign on to a principle that they won't take more than a certain amount of money?
I think that's a wonderful comment. First of all, you're right about the soft money. We all get into this jargon, and over again, my campaign people had to remind me to lay out what this is. Unregulated, often undisclosed, unlimited contributions that a federal court this year said could include foreign contributions from foreign governments and foreign individuals of completely unlimited amounts. But it's legal. And so we do have to find, I thought legalized bribery was stepping it up a bit, but maybe not. What I want to tell my colleagues and friends in politics, whether they're already in office or not, is how wonderful it feels when you limit your spending. First of all, your fundraisers and your campaign people can't beat you up about you got to raise more and more and more and raise the number and say you have to do more call time. Just say, I'm on target for how much I'm going to spend, and that's it. In fact, we ended up about early October essentially raising what we needed, and I didn't have to make a single phone call the last 3 weeks. And then I actually went to a fundraiser in Milwaukee in front of all the leaders of the Milwaukee political parties there and so on. About a week before the election, I went in there at a fundraiser and said, hey, don't send any more money. and the mayor and the congressman behind me all said, send it to me, send it to me. They'd never heard about it. It was a wonderful feeling to be able to go out and do that. So it has a liberating effect. But when I say that senators are upset about the system, they are. Whether or not they are so upset that they'd want to give up their seat is another question. Remember, though, a majority of the Senate has voted for this. This is not a situation where we have just a few votes. We have a clear majority. We have defeated Trent Lott time and again in terms of who has the majority, even though he has 55 senators. So it's reached the point where we need a few more people. It's not sort of at ground zero.
My name's Adam Lauritsen. I'm a sophomore at the college. What do you believe we can do besides campaign finance reform to help fight some of the cynicism in politics today, especially among my generation, and make sure that the best and the brightest of all Americans consider lives in public service?
Well, it isn't limited to campaign finance reform. It also has to do with the tone of politics. I have noticed in the Senate, just in the 6 years I've been there, and especially in the House, that the tone has declined, that the level of partisanship is worse, and it isn't helped by the tone, frankly, on some of these talk shows on television, where the premium, and I'd be the last one to ever say could do anything about it directly, where the premium is on who will get in there and fight. I get invitations to go on these shows, and a lot of times my staff say, well, all they want to do is get you on there and be harsh with the other person. That's not my nature, that's not Ellen Simpson's nature, and that's not David Pryor's nature. And to be encouraged in order to get that kind of coverage, to get on there and be rude and be harsh, I think is a real turnoff. There's not many parents who would say to their kids, I'd like to see you get on TV and be obnoxious like that. It's really quite a change. And I'm sure that there have always been senators who conduct themselves that way, and I'm sure they've been entertaining occasionally on the Senate floor, but it makes you feel bad. And I don't want to be a Pollyanna about this. I can be a scrapper. I can get angry, but generally speaking, the joy of public life is the opportunity to have a civil discourse with a person who has a different philosophy and to hopefully come to the same conclusion. We've come so far away from that. I would ask young people to go into politics, to say to yourself, I'm going to try this. I'm going to set rules about how much I'm willing to spend and what I'm willing to do and about how I'm going to act. And if I don't get elected, believe me, so what? It's not so great to make your way by being harsh and not telling the truth. So, it may sound sort of, as I say, too idealistic, but I really think things are different than the politics that I saw as a kid. Hubert Humphreys, the Gaylord Nelsons. These people gave me a model of civility that I think sometimes is missing. So I think that's terribly important, as well as doing something about the power of big money in politics.
My name is Jeremy Weinstein, and I am a student at the Kennedy School as well. I don't want to take too much attention away from the issue of campaign finance reform, but I think it's important to think as well today that we are a country at war in a part of Europe that was the center of where World War I and World War II began as well. I know President Clinton went down to Congress today or yesterday to consult with leaders in the Senate and the House as well about the issue of the use of NATO ground troops in Kosovo. And I was wondering if you'd care to comment on this issue, given that your central ally in campaign finance reform has been more seen right now on the talk shows talking about NATO ground forces in Kosovo, and you yourself sit on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and must be involved in this issue.
Well, as I think all people in the Senate know, what was amazing about Senator McCain and I getting together is we don't often agree. We have a great affection for each other. I do not agree with Senator McCain on this matter. He knows a lot more than I do about making war and about some of the things that have happened in this country. But I grew up in a time when we saw the results of an attempt to police the world. And I believe we are dangerously close to trying it again. I was the only Democrat in the Senate to vote against the Bosnia intervention. A terrible vote to have to take in light of the atrocities that this same man and this same regime were committing. When I see 250,000 American troops stationed abroad, when I see us still in Haiti, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Japan, Korea, Germany, and all these places, and I see the other countries of the world, I think saying, in effect, don't worry about it. If we get in a real mess, American troops will come in here. I see us heading down that road. So I voted against the bombing. I was one of only 3 Democrats, along with 39 Republicans, to take that position. Because, for 2 reasons. I do not oppose the bombing on philosophical grounds. I believe that if it could have been effective to bring Milosevic to his knees and to stop this, I would have supported it. And I still hope it has that effect. I do. But I thought that it wouldn't work. And I thought that it would guarantee that we would end up, which is the spirit of your question, in a situation where we are in effect forced out of national pride or the protection of NATO to have ground troops once again without any idea about when we'll get out. We were promised that the Bosnia operation would be 1 year, that it would cost $2 billion. It's cost over $10 billion. And finally, no one has sufficiently answered for me. Why are we not in Sudan? Why did we not act in Rwanda? Why are we not in Sierra Leone now? Why are we not in East Timor? I don't buy the distinctions that are being given at this point, but it is, I want you to know, compared to campaign finance reform, it's a much closer call, it's much tougher, and I'm not sure I'm right, but that's where I'm at.
My name is Preston Golson, freshman here at the college. I'd like to know what can be done to prevent, it seems like rich businessmen are giving money to both parties, and it seems like to be a blatant attempt at influencing both sides. Is there any provisions in your bill to help deal with that potential problem?
Let me just tell you a quick story about that exact issue. Our bill would do a great deal to deal with that because it bans soft money. It would put those individuals back in the position of being able to give $2,000 to this candidate or that candidate. And the story is the story of Federal Express. Senator Kennedy and I once held up the Senate for an extra week at the end of a Congress. Not a popular thing. In order to try to stop the Federal Express Corporation from changing labor law to allow them to I don't remember all the details tonight, I won't go through, but essentially gave them a competitive advantage against UPS. And they had given $100,000 that week to the Democrats and $100,000 to the Republicans. And they won after Kennedy and I got tired and were getting beat up by our colleagues. They wanted to go home. We couldn't do it anymore, and they got their provision. And remember what happened? There was a little strike over at UPS. Federal Express got 15% of their business. That's a pretty good deal for $200,000. Afterward, Fred Smith, a brilliant man who invented Federal Express, a great American entrepreneur, said he wanted to see me. And he came into my office and we sat down and he said, I just want you to understand. You guys set up the rules. I have an obligation to my board of directors to play by the rules to win for them. It is legal. I am going to do this kind of giving to both sides until you change the rules. So it's up to us. I find it hard to blame the business people. There are some CEOs. In fact, one of my companies that I've fought with the most over the years, extremely uncomfortable, the Monsanto Corporation. What they've done to Wisconsin dairy farmers, in my view. But they have forsworn soft money, and according to the New York Times yesterday, they are the one company that has actually stuck to it. We need to pass a bill that makes it not somebody's fiduciary duty to go down to Congress and give a $250,000 contribution. That's what we need to do. And our bill would ban the soft money.
Thank you.
My name is C.J. Mahoney. I'm a junior at the college. And first of all, let me thank you, Senator, for coming here this evening and speaking with us. My question actually involves labor unions, and I was wondering if you're bothered by the contributions of labor unions, given the fact that many of these people give their dues to the Political Action Committee of the labor movement. Then the heads of that committee will donate to candidates without regard to who the preferences of the actual union members are.
Of course, this is part of the issue, and the genius of the 1974 law, before it was effectively destroyed by soft money, is that a big union, over the course of 6 years, could only give a candidate like myself $10,000 total. And that had to come from a certain segregated funds for PAC money. What is the problem, and which our bill addresses again, is that unions and corporations and individuals can now get around that by using the soft money loophole, or by doing these so-called issue ads that aren't really issue ads, which is another matter that we deal with in our bill, try to at least make that a more real and honest process. So I am troubled by it. And finally, and this is especially important to many of the Republican members, our bill does make sure that the so-called Beck decision, a Supreme Court decision, which does say that non-union members should be able to get a refund if they don't want to pay for that sort of thing, our bill does codify that and move forward with it. It is in contrast to Senator Lott's so-called poison pill amendment, which would go much further and I think would make it very difficult in an unfair way only for the union. So I think our bill is balanced. It affects corporations and unions and wealthy individuals in essentially the same manner, and it curtails what I consider to be the abusive aspects of labor contributions. I don't think PAC money by itself by unions, there was a time when that was a big deal, but now it's a relatively spare change compared to what's going on from these various interests. It does need to be addressed, though, the labor issue.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brandon Hoffmeister. I'm a senior at the college, originally from Michigan. I was wondering if you could address the problems that Buckley versus Vallejo poses for campaign finance, and if you see any prospects for actually working like within the court, or if we're going to have to go completely outside of the court.
Well, this is both a kind of a scary and an exciting time in terms of the court and campaign finance reform. We've sort of operated on the assumption for several years that Buckley's it and we have to deal with it. And Mccain-Feingold is carefully drafted, in my view, to be something that the court would approve. I don't think there's any question that our original proposals that had to do with voluntary spending limits are sufficiently similar to the presidential system that if we passed it would be approved. I don't have any question in my mind that, at least I'm very, very hopeful, that any court would say that these huge soft money contributions fit the test of the decision that talked about a level of contribution that could lead to a corrupting influence. A closer case would be our provisions that have to do with how you define an electioneering ad, whether simply you'll have to actually mention somebody's name or whether you have to literally advocate their election. That might be closer, but remember that when the court took up the case in Buckley v. Vallejo, they really cut the thing in half. They threw out the mandatory spending limits, which I wish they would have approved, but they did keep in place the contribution limits. And so that has been the law for many years, and it's been the basis for our bill. What's happening now throughout the courts at the lower level, and we think some of this will come to the Supreme Court, is sort of challenges in both directions. Some are challenging the notion that you can have any kind of campaign contribution limits at all. And I think that will be defeated by or overruled by the Supreme Court, but I'm not certain, because most of the lower courts are saying that won't happen. Others are saying that we ought to just take a direct assault on this notion that the court in effect ruled that money equals speech, and that maybe the court will re-examine that. This has been a long enough process. I'm not frustrated, but it's been a long enough process that I'm almost ready to roll the dice and see what the court would say. We have some folks that we know what they'll do. We have some new justices that we're not sure. But I do want to have one caution, because there are people in this room, and someday I might be one of them, who will say, if we can't get the court to change, let's amend the Bill of Rights. I don't want to do that. Not even for campaign finance reform. One time, Senator Fritz Hollings, a great colleague of ours, got up and he was tired of all this back and forth about what provision or that provision. He said, let's just do a constitutional amendment. And in the wonder of the Senate, I had 20 minutes to decide how I was going to vote on a constitutional amendment. It was just a sense of the Senate. And I voted for a constitutional amendment to limit campaign spending, and by the time I got back to my office, I knew I had at least taken one vote that I regretted. Because then in 1994, this very talented bunch was elected who had all kinds of other ideas about how to amend the Bill of Rights. I like to say in Wisconsin style, to make Swiss cheese of the Bill of Rights. Flag burning amendment, banning abortion amendment, school prayer amendment. Everybody's got their own good idea about how to amend the Bill of Rights. My view is it's better to stay away from it. We need to work within the court. We need to work within legislation, but I have to confess there are moments when I really shudder at the thought of what the court could do if they completely supported this current system.
Hi, Mike Bosian, Kennedy School. As I'm sure you found out, campaign finance reform is not an issue that the public's very engaged in. And it seems today your strategy is to try to tie it to issues that affect the consumer's wallet, really. And I'm wondering if you think the link is clear enough, and if you think electricity, telecom, and bananas will do the trick.
Well, I think having been in politics for 16 years, that what I'm hearing, I go to every Wisconsin county every year and hold a town meeting, on about 500 of them. I'm hearing a lot about cable TV. That's a living room issue, if there ever was one. People get mad. ATM fees. I know people, I think the comedian, Al Franken wrote a book about how he's going to make a whole presidential campaign out of ATM fees. It's a very funny book. You start putting that together with your phone bill, your electricity bill, your cable bill. If you want to, you have a legitimate right to file bankruptcy, and you can't without having to reaffirm all kinds of debts you shouldn't have to reaffirm. You put that all together, and you let people know how these laws became so harsh or completely uncontrolled without competition. I think it can work. But we are at the front end of trying to make that link. Bill Bradley was right. I thought that just the display of the 1996 elections, the foreign money, the Lincoln bedroom, and so on, I thought that would be enough. In our day, it would have been enough. Maybe. It was, in our day, in the 70s, enough. A scandal in Washington to cause reform. But today, it's going to take more. And what I'm doing tonight is indicating my willingness, which I've been a little reticent about, because I don't want to accuse colleagues of doing things that are improper. It's not what I'm saying, but we're going to have to make this link, and all of you can help do it. The story has to be told. It's a pretty sad story.
Hello. My name is Elsie Sharouzi, head of the linguistic department of the Firdaus University. First of all, nice to have you. Mr. Feingold, I heard you a few months ago in press club in Washington, D.C., and I thought that it was good news you would have this bill sponsored by you and John McCain, pass the Senate. Later on, I want to ask you veracity of such a rumor, whether this bill, original bill, was voted on, and secondly, why there was the postponement and the delay in passing this bill, and then other things, if there is not enough momentum in Senate, why you don't take this to the people and make the campaign issue, because there is not the awareness on the grassroots. I work and with the people, whether in my country or here. I am in touch with them, and I know that public awareness is not to that level. I am not saying that to be demagogue or the populist politics you resort, but it is a very legitimate issue, has a repercussion. It has some application in people's life, and this cynicism and the lack of the disrespect or the lack of the interest and the trust in the public peoples, these some degrees people assume the money buys the power and the influence. They can be converted to each other's. And yes, this is my question. Yes, another what the question is, given the fact you and Mr. John McCain from two ends of the political spectrum, how you came together even in what you call a Kosovo question, you were opposed him. He's very hawkish. How you came about and sponsored this bill. And by the way, I want the last things, Mr. Sampson, I am your fan. The reason I am here because I very what you call fond of you, sir. I have known you for the 15 years. Yes, that's why and thank you.
All right, I'm trying to remember the first part. It had to do with why the bill was watered down. Absolutely. Well, it's about votes. I was very sad when the provisions that had to do with free television time and the provisions that had to do with reduced television time and some of the provisions having to do with wealthy individuals had to be eliminated from the bill so we could try to get enough votes to at least have a majority. And what I tried to convey to you tonight was the change that I've gone through in watching this soft money problem come up to the point where even though it's a hard compromise for me, I agree that we have to at least address that. The fact is we are not without momentum. We started with a couple of people. We have gradually gone from the point where they said you'd never get more than a couple of Republicans. After Allen left, we just had Thompson and McCain, but we built it up to 7 Republicans, and we now have a majority. So we do have some momentum. But you are also right that one of the best ways to illustrate this is to make it a part of your campaign. This is what I did in 1998. I think it is going to, the result of that is to have, maybe to pick up a couple of votes, but what would be very exciting, of course, would be if a candidate for president or several candidates for president did this. Some of these guys aren't very high in the polls anyway. They might as well give it a shot. You don't have to raise the money, which is great, and you can run around talking about how you didn't raise money and you ought to be elected. It just might catch on, and you might be president, and I think at least some of them, maybe Mr. Forbes would like to try that. I don't think that's too likely. I got to tell you about John McCain, though. The only encounter I'd ever had with John in my first 2 years in the Senate was that I came down on the floor with the bright idea of getting rid of the CVN-76, which was to be the 12th nuclear aircraft carrier, the biggest expenditure in the federal government. I didn't know, I didn't do my job, that it was going to be called USS Ronald Reagan. And when I got out there, I knew I had trouble anyway. All the big military senators came down, Senator Warner, Senator Robb, and they all came down to tear me to shreds, but the toughest one of all was John McCain, who said, "Will the senator from Wisconsin, junior senator from Wisconsin, yield for a question?" And I said, "Yes, I would." And he said, "Have you ever been on a nuclear aircraft carrier?" And I said, "No." And sort of after that, there wasn't much to say. That was it. That was it. And then, for some reason, and I give John tremendous credit, 3 days after the Republicans took over the Senate, I went from being the 57th member of the Senate, the last Democrat, to number 100. I was still the last Democrat, but things had shifted. John McCain calls me out of the blue while I'm driving around Wisconsin and says, "I've been looking at your record on political reform and deficit reduction. Will you work with me?" I said, "Sure." A new chairman of the Commerce Committee. I thought, this is a pretty good deal. And he said he wanted to work with me on the revolving door legislation. I said, "Help me with the gift ban." That's how we got the gift ban, because John McCain joined with us and others. And then about 4 months later, John approached me about campaign finance reform, and I thought, well, we'll never be able to agree on that, but in fact, we were. So I give the senator and the majority party the lion's share of the credit for making this happen.
Just time for 2 more questions, really, here and then to this microphone. Please.
Mine will be quick. My name is Marge Mitt. I'm a student at the Kennedy School. I've been looking at the issue, or did a short synopsis of a case study in Maine, where they passed campaign finance reform, the Clean Elections Act. What role does the grassroots effort have? Would it impact your movement? Is it smarter to wait for more grassroots activity? Would you have a stronger bill, or more awareness, as one of the other members of the audience mentioned?
The grassroots activity is by far the most important thing that's going on in this country on campaign finance reform. It's more important than what we're doing. Because unless political people, office holders feel the pressure from back home, it doesn't work. And I believe that what's going on in the states, whether it be Massachusetts or Colorado or Maine, is completely consistent with what we're doing. I'm the first to tell you, our bill isn't comprehensive reform. It's not even major reform. It's modest reform, but it is not in any way inconsistent with what you're trying to do. There's no reason why you couldn't put a public financing or a partial public financing in place after this. But I do think at this point we need to face the reality. I have no Republican senators that I know of who will support public financing, and in fact very few Democrats that I know, or at least not all of them. So that's the real politic of it, but I think what you're doing is the way that we are going to ultimately get the whole job done.
We could take, since there's just two seeking recognition, we'll take two short questions if we could, please. Thank you. These two.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Amy Wyatt. I work at Mass Voters for Clean Elections. And Senator Feingold, thank you for coming to speak with us this afternoon. And I also used to work at the Kennedy School, so I'm back in I worked at the Shorenstein Center for Press and Politics. And my question is, I guess I apologize if I didn't hear the first 10 minutes of your talk, but I'm wondering if you can compare federal to state efforts. The Mass Voters for Clean Elections, for those of you who don't know, is a grassroots effort. At this point, we're trying to get the legislature to fund a law that was passed as question 2 on the ballot last fall for public financing of campaigns. So I know it's been successful in some states, and if you could talk about that. Thanks.
I mentioned in my earlier remarks that my first experience in politics was with a public financing or partial public financing system that worked. I was able to finance my campaign with small contributions up to about $17,000, $18,000, and I got that much matched. And this is the way it was in the sort of post-Watergate reform era in Wisconsin. I think this Massachusetts bill is a wonderful example, and I really hope that the funding will be provided to go along with the 67% of the people's will, because it'd be such a shame. In fact, I think it could increase some public cynicism if this passes by this margin and then the legislature and the governor here don't follow the people's will and allow it to be tried in the year 2002 elections. In fact, I think in many ways this would be the first real implementation of it all the way through, correct me if I'm wrong, of a new bill that actually works. It could be a model for what my ultimate goals would be in terms of federal legislation. So I see it as complementary, and what we're trying to do at this point with the McCain-Feingold bill does not do those things. I wish it did.
Thank you. And final question, please.
Following up on Amy's question, my name's Bill McCormick. I'm at the Center for Blood Research at the medical school. But I have supported Mass Voters for Clean Elections and Common Cause. Now, actually, just to follow up, and I don't want to use this as a forum to advertise, However, what we said is we must get our state legislature to do this. So everybody in this room could actually help in doing it. And because you're saying that we have to get them to pass this. To get our state legislators involved, we must let them know we as citizens want to back up that 70% vote we made last fall, and to visit them. So Common Cause, Mass Voters for Clean Election needs more volunteers to visit the legislators. So just call either organization up, and we really have to start doing it. This can actually get it done in this state. And it's incumbent, because I think 60% of our state legislators do not have competition because they don't want to have this financing passed. So if you would encourage everybody in the audience to call up and help us organize this campaign, I'd appreciate it.
In one sentence, let me just say it would be the greatest gift to our national efforts if you could actually implement and show here in this great state that you don't have to have elections based on who's got the most money. It would be wonderful, and I strongly encourage it. Thank you very much for having me.
I'm going to ask you one question. Which of the organizations that are Excuse me, sir. If you could wait a minute, sir, thank you. Thank you. Just let me thank Russ, thank you, and thank you for your good questions. In my time working with campaign finance reform, and I'm appalled at several groups that have come forward now and said that anything that Russ is doing, and John, is somehow a violation of your First Amendment right of expression. And boy, that rings a bell with people. It confuses them. And is there, without naming groups, how do you handle that one? Because that's one that really does, yeah, you can't take away my right to give a guy $100 and that kind of thing. What do you do with that one, Russ?
Well, it is one of the toughest problems. I think it was a difficult thing for a number of the senators, especially Republican senators, who wanted to join us because there was a campaign of intentional misinformation conducted. For example, some of those on the right, some of the interest groups on the right, insisted that we were going to try to ban voter guides, written voter guides. Completely untrue. They pointed to some language that was, they claimed, ambiguous, so John drafted some language that just explicitly says we're not going to do that, and yet I still, at town meetings and when I spoke in Cleveland, people are saying, why are you trying to prohibit voter guides? It simply doesn't do anything of the kind. Even more difficult, and I had to go through this in the campaign, was the advertisements of Russ Feingold trying to put you in handcuffs for speaking your mind, which was an attempt to claim that our desire, that if you mention a candidate's name in the last 60 days, that you have to tell who you are, and you have to raise your money under the limits that everybody else exists under, that somehow was stopping you. Our bill does not prevent anyone from saying anything at any time. All I can do is say that as many times as I can and as many for as I can.
That's what I hoped you'd do, because that's so true. Well, there you are, a reasonable, sensible, and sensitive man, and a man of courage. And we admire you and appreciate what you're doing, and you're on the right track. It'll take a while, but you'll get them educated. You will get it done because of your persistence. So thanks very much, Russ. Thank you all. Thank you for your questions.